Hey guys, welcome back. This is the part 9 of What If Naruto Was a Hollow. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well, it really means a lot. So let's start the what if. Slaves. Slaves are what lined the rotten walls of the chamber where Drindo was currently at. Packed into tight confines and forced to face deplorable conditions, slaves were the secret weapons of all the Reino humanoid, because these slaves weren't just any slaves. They were powerful, merciless in combat, and fearsome. Yet, every single one of them fell to the Reino humanoid at some point in their lives, was captured, and placed under these terrible conditions. And the one thing that united them was that every single one of them was an animal-based hollow. From snake-based hollows to wolf-based hollows, every type of animal hollow imaginable was held in captivity. There was not a single humanoid hollow slave that existed within the walls of this chamber. There were dozens of cells on either side of the long chamber, each one stuffed to the brim with dozens, if not hundreds of hollows, crammed together so tightly that in some of the cells, the prisoners couldn't move at all. There were leaks all over the ceiling and the walls, oozing an unholy green slime at a rate that would make one wonder what was behind these walls. In addition to that, moss was growing all over the stone walls, some toxic to hollows and causing a hideous skin reaction towards them. The only source of light was a small torch hanging limply in the center of the room, but even a human could smell the death and rotting flesh that permeated the room, giving it a foul-smelling aura. One could call this place a prison, but it was probably more resembling of an incredibly dark, incredibly cramped stable. Its entire decor seemed to give this off, as if the kingdom was treating these hollows no better than the animals that they were. The killing intent and Ryatsu wafted over Drindo, but he did nothing but smile broadly at their feeble attempts to make some kind of impression upon him. He shut the door behind him, and panned his eyes around the room, trying to get a rough count of how many slaves there were, though he knew that there would be too many to count. The eyes followed him around the room as he walked into the farther portion of the chamber, his feet making a slight creak in the rotten floor. He eyed one hollow giving him a particularly nasty look, which he cowed with a smirk, and a release of his Ryatsu. The eyes disappeared at the display of his impressive Ryatsu, retreated to what pitiful state they could muster in the face of their master. He gave the entire room a strange cross between a smirk and a sneer, before he arrived at the very end of the chamber, where a door very different than the rest lay. It was the only one in the room that was stationed perpendicular to the rest, and it appeared to be in much better shape than the ones that were on the side of the room, though would still be considered rotten with how little care this place received. There was a red insignia for the Reino humanoid on the door, with a sort of tail-like thing protruding out from it to function as a doorknob. Drindo knew the occupant inside was aware of his presence near the door, judging from the slightly heavy Ryatsu that now blanketed the air. Drindo wasn't fazed, however. Without any sort of hesitation, he opened the door, making a slight creak as he did so, and laid his eyes upon the rebellious occupant inside. The humanoid king stepped inside, and looked at the figure chained to the wall. It had a shockingly lean and curvaceous body, which was rare for an Ajuchus. You could easily tell it was female, judging from the large protrusions on its chest. There were 4 chains emerging from the hollow hole on its sweet spot, connecting the hollow to the wall in a disturbingly uncomfortable position. The figure turned its head upwards, showing an angular mask that showed 2 rows of incredibly sharp teeth, even by hollow standards. It had numerous gashes all over its body, and the smell of dried blood was far more pungent over in this area. If one squinted hard enough, they could see the numerous blood stains that lined the entire cell, even in the dark. This hollow was rebellious by nature, so it was punished on a much more regular basis. Its position, and the blood stain indicated that it has been tortured repeatedly in the past. Drindo could feel the creature glare at him, the look of pure, unadulterated hatred visible on its visage made even him cringe slightly on the inside. It was so powerful, and he could tell that it wanted nothing more than to rip him to shreds in the most violent way possible, while making sure he felt as much pain as possible at the same time. Nevertheless, he was a powerful Vasto Lorde, and didn't let the killing intent get to him. Rather, he adopted an even wider grin at the sight of the miserable creature, amused by its pain. He placed a shrouded hand on his hip, his mocking expression and pose stirring even more ire in the hollow, if that were even possible. "How are we feeling today, Harabel?" he mocked, saying her name in the most sarcastic, yet sugary manner possible. It made the said hollow want to vomit in pure disgust. Harabel attempted to croak out of response, yet couldn't through her ruptured throat. What came out instead was a throaty, incomprehensible gurgle, one that made the king laugh uproariously in amusement. "What a miserable creature you are, Harabel. What happened to the calm, cool, somewhat arrogant disposition you had while you were facing me in battle a few years ago? Those failed attempts at rebellion must have quelled your spirit. You understand that it hopeless, a bestie like you will never be able to overcome the perfect humanoid hollows," he mocked, grabbing her chin and forcing her to look directly into his eyes. She grimaced when she saw the sheer cruelty in them, and was instantly reminded of what she had been going through these past few years. Harabel didn't attempt a response to his words however, and instead she spat a glob of bloody saliva and phlegm all over Drindo's coat, an act which thoroughly enraged the king. "Go to hell," he roared, kicking her roughly in the mask, multiple times for that matter. A sickening crack was heard every time he brought down his foot, and the other hollows receded even farther into their cages, trying to be as small as possible in the presence of the rabid king. The shark hollow recoiled roughly from the blows, falling to her knees and coughing up a good portion of blood. But Drindo wasn't about to let her be and wallow in her misery just yet. "Have you forgotten that I can terminate you and all the other slaves at any given time?" he said, roughly grabbing a strange medallion attached to her neck by a chain. She grimaced at the contact, showing a look of pure emotional pain. "This chain is imbued with my special Ryatsu, and I can release it at any time. I hold your life in my hands, my dear Harabel. I suggest you don't take that lightly," he hissed, his hot, putrid breath washing over her in a wave, which almost made her gag in response. Harabel pulled away from him, looking thoroughly repulsed and angry at the development. Drindo eyed her with pure racist contempt, until he accepted it and turned his back to her. "Anyway, regardless of your constant acts of disrespect, bestie, I will admit that you are the most powerful in my army of slaves, hence why I have given you the lowly title as leader of these slaves. I have not come here to taunt or torture you this time around. Instead, I have a little assignment for you and the rest of the slaves," Drindo explained, the whole time keeping his back to her. Harabel looked up again, no curiosity staining her features, but a realization that she would have to follow through with whatever he ordered her to perform, consequences be damned. It was almost like she was afraid to hear what she was doing, because she already knew that it would not be pleasant. At the very worst, she would be sent to her death. The details of this assignment are unimportant. Simply fight where I tell you to fight and kill who I tell you to kill, and there won't be any sort of problem. Disobey or fail me in any way, and I will not hesitate to kill you. This isn't a particularly big job, so I'm only taking the hollows from 3 of my 16 slave houses that I have throughout the island. We will depart to the mainland in -24 hours, where we will engage another, much weaker kingdom in battle. I'm shipping you out on the Leviathan hollows tonight." Drindo finished. He gave one last fleeting look at Harabel, before he flicked his coat and turned his back on her. Drindo swept out of the chamber without another glance at her or any of the other slaves. Oh, how she hated him. She hated him so much. This racist piece of shit is the reason her life was so fucked up, and all because she was an animal hollow. She hated him, and the other slave hollows did as well. She knew that God wouldn't answer some kind of unholy hollow, but still, she prayed with all her might to be rescued from this torment. It was the only thing that had kept her going. "So, it seems we're going to have to make do with this small amount of hollows," said Naruto, who was currently perched in his future throne room along with Ulquiorra, who was going over some basic hollow warfare tactics with his king. Things weren't looking so good, and against his will, Naruto had the sinking impression that running away from this place would simply be the best option. But, if he did that, how would he ever become a powerful king in Huecamundo? If he was afraid of some other kingdom that wanted to bring him down, he would never be successful. Well, with the forces down from their last attack, we're completely reliant on the couple thousand or so hollows that you brought back from your trip. Speaking of which, you were mentioning something about filling 2 spots of this for general's idea that you had. Ulquiorra replied back. Naruto grinned widely, as he recalled that he had gained 2 fine fighters to add to his forces. Such a thing would already improve their chances, regardless of how slight that may be. Yeah, Grimmjow and Neutra. They show a lot of potential in addition to their already existing power, if I do say so myself. I told them to meet me in this chamber before we went, so they should be getting here pretty soon. Ulquiorra looked at his king, reflecting on his recent words. It may have been his imagination, but did it seem like his king was getting smarter? He was beginning to show signs of stress from this entire ordeal, and he was notably harder and more gaunt than when he first met him. It was like all his insecurities were beginning to show throughout the front. Not that this did anything for his ways. He seemed even more lustful for battle, and was much more high-strung. If he kept going like this, it wouldn't be good. It was like some semblance of sanity he had had before was slowly but surely disappearing. Ulquiorra was cut off from his thoughts by the creaking of the wooden door, and he could visibly make out 2 figures coming through. They seemed to be at each other's throats though, with their natural weapons drawn and them yelling curse words at each other. Naruto grinned even wider, before he randomly launched a Zero from his mouth. The orange ball of light went streamed towards the 2 new hollow, and the 2 were lucky enough to detect it in time and jump out of the way. The ball of light almost completely obliterated the door in a blast of orange, and Ulquiorra idly wondered how they were going to replace that. What the fuck was that for? They yelled at the same time, at their king who now had the biggest shit-eating grin Ulquiorra had ever seen on his face at the moment. He resisted the urge to sigh, remarking in his mind that he would do something like this to his newest underlings. Just testing ya. And I wanted to see if I could piss you off a little bit. He commented, much to the ire of Grimmjow and Neutra, who now seemed to want to tear out Naruto's throat. Ulquiorra scoffed. So much for his king getting smarter. Anyway, you two, I was just telling Ulquiorra here, he gestured to his stoic right-hand man, whom Grimmjow and Neutra both scowled at. That we really don't have enough force to stick it to what is an apparently powerful kingdom. Though, we'll have to stand and fight, because if we don't, this kingdom will remain a thorn in our sides until one of us eventually destroys the other, he stated. Grimmjow and Neutra looked unimpressed. What kind of cowardly bullshit is that? We should just go crush them right now with brute force. It's the only way to really get things done around here. Grimmjow muttered. An absurdly wide, and clearly fake smile came on Naruto's face. The eyes under his mask became slightly bloodshot, and the pupils shook with barely suppressed insanity. Okay, that's the best idea in the world. He exclaimed in an overly happy tone. In fact, I'm so confident that this will work, why don't you just barge into that little kingdom of theirs, and take it by storm all by yourself? How does that sound? He laughed, the noise sounding oddly vacant and empty. No one else dared make a sound. A scary, half-lidded glare was what replaced Naruto's smile, and everyone thought that Naruto was going to burn a hole straight through Grimmjow with the way he was looking at him. I thought so. He said lowly. What the fuck? Is he bipolar? Grimmjow thought in bewilderment, thinking back to a few moments ago when he happily blasted him with a Zero, and looking at the seriously pissed off hollow now. Anyway, it's been established that we will not pursue a direct attack. We will let them come to us, and we'll have to somehow use this cave complex and the terrain to our advantage. That's basically what we've been going over, Grimmjow. Neutra. Naruto said. The 4 hollows sat in a tense silence for a few seconds. By the way, Naruto. I think it's imperative for you to know something about this particular kingdom. Ulquiorra said, breaking the silence that had fallen over the room. The fox hollow turned to Ulquiorra, a questioning look on his face. In response, the bat hollow across from him cleared his throat and told him what had happened. An odd thing about this kingdom is that the denizens of it will never actually fight personally. In fact, we were crushed completely by it, without them actually lifting a finger. Ulquiorra explained. A cold chill seemed to go down the spines of all three hollows. What the fuck? How were you beaten then, if their entire fighting force didn't even attack? Naruto questioned. Ulquiorra could practically feel his ire rising, and his manic anger, one that wanted to watch the world burn, was reigning supreme. Ulquiorra wasn't fazed. Let me elaborate. This kingdom seems to have a very strange policy. It is that of a racist approach to anything that isn't a humanoid hollow. Apparently, these hollows believe solely that being a hollow more resembling of a human means that they are smarter and stronger. Along with this racist attitude comes the keeping of thousands of animal-based hollow slaves. It was them who defeated us in battle, these animal slaves forced to fight for this kingdom. Naruto calmed down completely, letting a smirk come onto his face and a snort of laughter escape his lips. What, do these guys get a mad boner for humans or something? If anything, in this world of hollows, being more like a human should be a hindrance rather than a blessing. Naruto guffawed. I don't know any sort of history that goes on in this kingdom, but I do know that these animal hollows are a massive threat to us, and even if we manage to draw out the humanoid hollows into fighting, they are a large threat as well. Ulquiorra concluded. Naruto seemed to be contemplating that at least a little bit, though he became unfocused as he began to walk slowly around the room. He stopped at one of the hollow mask torches flanking either side of the large, stone chair in the back. He reached out his front paw, lightly touching the torch while he seemed to go into very deep thought. Pieces of shit. He muttered to himself, though Ulquiorra, Grimjow, and Neutra all heard it. They stood in silence for a little while, the only sounds being the deep, slow breathing of Naruto, who had his eyes closed and was apparently very deep in thought. He stroked the bony material of the mask lightly, noticing it resembled a bear of some kind. The other torch's mask resembled a humanoid hollow, and its flame was noticeably dimmer than the one he was currently touching. The hollows heard a distant crash, like some kind of boulder falling down a gorge inside the cave complex. It wasn't uncommon for things like this to occur, especially while living in such a treacherous cave filled with many deep pits and gorges. But, with one so sudden right now, it seemed that some of the new recruits were beginning to get settled into the cave complex. Naruto opened his eyes slowly, his signature psychopathic grin coming onto his face yet again. He clutched the torch a little firmer, to the point where the mask began to crack underneath the pressure. The other three hollows heard some light snickering, though its volume didn't make it any less disturbing. The torch finally gave into the pressure, and snapped in half just as the laughter stopped. The eerie fire was instantly put out, and Naruto laughed yet again. I know just what to do, he exclaimed, turning back to his generals at breakneck speed, looking very happy at his new idea. It had taken a few days for Drindo to prepare everything for the second invasion because of several delays that he was having with the slaves. He had beaten them severely after their little failures, and he made sure that there would be no more screw UPS from this point on. Usually, he had the slaves just do manual labor around the entire island. Their fighting purpose was rarely exploited, and when it was, they were almost always out of practice and weakened. It was nothing a good beating couldn't clear up though. Ships didn't exist in Huecomundo, and as such they had to use the many large, Leviathan hollows he had under his reign to transport him, a portion of his army, and the slaves to the mainland. But it turned out that the mindless hollows were seriously acting up when it was time to leave, so he had to put the stupid beasts into submission. By the time they reached the mainland, his temper was running high, and he simply wanted to destroy the fox and bat right there and go back. The king stepped out of the largest blue Leviathan onto the dirt, watching his army and the slaves emerge from the smaller ones. With limited interest, he watched all the Leviathans sink back into the sea, to when they would be called again. The plateau where the detestable hollows would presumably lie was not that far, and he detected some Semariatsu come from the inside of the mountain. Good, that meant the fox was probably back, and from the looks of things, he had brought some fresh new hollows. Just as he expected. Still, it wouldn't be enough to put a dent in even his slaves, much less the portion of the army that he brought with him. Harabel. he ordered lowly, as the leader of the slaves got off the Leviathan. Outside the dank, dark slave chamber, Drindo took in her full appearance. She was around 9 feet from head to toe, with a slender, feminine build, which was surprising for an Aegyptius. She was covered in head to toe in a white, bony material, except for a few patches along her sides. There appeared to be several spines of some sort sticking out along her body, and a large fin sticking out from her shark-like mask. She had 2 rows of incredibly sharp teeth along her mask, and even by hollow standards, they looked like they could rip through anything. Her eyes underneath the mask were just like any other hollows, though they looked considerably more compassionate than in normal hollows. What looked like gills existed on her left hip, and to complete her appearance, her hands were enormous bony blades that sort of looked like a shark's top half. She would look dazzling if hollows had any sense of beauty whatever. Drindo mused in his mind, chuckling slightly to himself as he remembered that hollows were completely asexual. They couldn't reproduce after all, but somehow, all those now useless reproductive organs carried over from their human lives. She walked awkwardly towards them, many cramps existing in her frame after being held in such a compromising position for so long. She looked at Drindo with no small amount of hatred, but refrained from attacking him, knowing his power was far greater than hers, as well as noting that all the guards seemed to tense up at her presence. Pathetic cowards. Now that she was free, they didn't think anything would stop her from goring through them like wet paper. Well, they were partially right. The slaves behind her were dazed, probably at going so long without being held captive. She felt for them, she truly did, but their day of reckoning wasn't today. Again, they would be forced to fight his enemies, so they can live on and wait for the day when they'll be able to escape. No matter how far away it was, there would come a time when Drindo's kingdom would fall, and they would be there to rise from the ashes and achieve their freedom. She was brought forth from her musings when one of the guards jabbed her in the ass with a sharp limb. Why did Drindo always have to pick the ones with the painful limbs to be the ones to watch over the slaves? Get your ass movin', Harabel. Didn't you hear Drindo-sama order you to tear this place a new asshole? Drawled the incredibly large, stupid-looking guard, the thoughtless look on his face oddly fitting. Don't touch me. She hissed lowly, resisting the urge to tear off his head. The guard looked baffled and appalled, as if he couldn't believe that a bestie just mouthed off and threatened him. What was it, bitch? You talkin' back to me? He slurred, spreading putrid, green deposits of spittle in Harabel's face. They seemed slightly acidic, but not enough to even faze the shark hollow. Before anything could escalate, Drindo's voice rang throughout the entire area, effectively canceling any sort of fight that would inevitably happen between the two. Came in, shut the fuck up and get back in line, damn it. And Harabel, you'd best be following my orders, and move all the slaves up the plateau and kill every hollow there, he shouted. Cayman looked ready to resist his king's orders, but he fell back in line with the other guards, after a nasty glare at Harabel, which she gladly returned at him. Harabel sighed. The slaves didn't need any prodding. Drindo's booming voice was enough for them to begin reluctantly scaling the plateau next to them. Harabel joined them after a few seconds, digging her sharp hands in the rock face. It yielded surprisingly easily, and she began her climb, some other slaves taking up the rear behind her. Oh, and all of you. Leave the Bat Aegyptius and the Fox Aegyptius alive. If either one of them is killed in the process of destroying this place, you will all be terminated. Drindo's booming voice rang throughout every slave's ears. The slaves relayed that information to those who didn't hear it, or those who were too stupid to comprehend it. Not that there were many mindless hollows in the group. The slaves consisted mostly of Aegyptius, and some intelligent normal hollows. There were mindless hollows at one point in time, but they were weeded out easily. They were killed by guards when they attempted to eat each the other hollows. Harabel heard her stomach growl. She really wasn't getting enough food. Drindo at least made sure to prevent any regressions from Aegyptius to Jillian with at least a little something to eat, but Harabel wasn't so sure he knew what he was doing. Food was becoming scarce in recent years. Eating each other was strictly forbidden in order to prevent a loss of numbers, and most of their food came from war prisoners that he deemed separate from slaves. It was fitting for the racists. Half of the animal hollows became slaves, and the other half became food to keep the slaves alive. Speaking of war, Haribel knew that there would be more than a few casualties that came from this. When fighting another group, Drindo always underestimated their power, thinking he could finish it with small numbers. It was likely that this kingdom was far stronger than what Drindo gave them credit for. She looked at the hollow next to her. He was a young hollow, only captured recently, though he seemed to be much weaker and frail than any of the other slaves. And even though he was only captured recently, he knew just as well as she did that some of them would die in this battle. His face was stoic, but for a brief moment, Haribel thought she could see a small glimpse of sadness in his eyes, and wondered how the evil look of Hollow's eyes can actually be something tragic. But, as soon as she saw it, it was gone, a fleeting emotion in this entire ordeal. Fleeting, in a way, it described each and every one of their lives. Right after Naruto's return. Behind Naruto's, and formerly Terobik's, gilded throne, lay a great secret passed down to the now deceased Ox Hollow. It was something that could tear two brothers apart, start a war between nations, and bring all of Huecomundo to its knees. No one other than Drindo and Terobik knew about any of this, and even Drindo was at a loss as to where he got it, or where he was hiding it. And, rather than remain within his younger brother's graces, the king's racist attitude, and what this secret held caused the two brothers to drift apart from one another. It remained in its hidden spot until Terobik was usurped from the cave, and Ulquiorra stumbled across a secret passageway behind Naruto's throne, while the Bat Hollow was alone in the cave complex. He had taken a temporary residence in the throne room, after he disposed of all the bodies left behind in Drindo's wake. He was also archiving the various hazards and terrain of the cave complex at that moment, trying to figure what could be used to their advantage, in case something like this happened in the future. It was as he was checking behind the throne for anything, that he stumbling across this passageway. Ulquiorra wasn't stupid, so he wasn't about to gallivanting off alone into the eternal darkness of this narrow passageway. But, he had a feeling that Naruto would please to know that there might be something of use back there. So, the bat told him. A few hours directly after he had gotten back, and the disbelief of getting attacked had melted away into pure, righteous anger, Ulquiorra told him about the secret tunnel directly behind the throne. Naruto, while still steaming from the recent revelations, accepted the information wholeheartedly. He told Ulquiorra to go control his new disoriented followers, while he went off and explored the passageway alone. Anyway, the Fox Hollow found Ulquiorra's words to be true, as when he pushed the heavy throne to the side, there was a concealed passageway, large enough for a Vasto Lorde or a small Ajuchas like himself to squeeze through. Looks like this is it, he said to himself, pressing a paw or two against the walls of the passageway, to make sure that they wouldn't cave in on him. When he decided that it was safe, he stepped inside the passage. He narrowed his eyes, as after a few yards into the tunnel, he came across a few crude carvings along the cave wall, all of the same thing. They were of a chimera-like shape, with a hole in its chest to signify that the being was in fact a hollow. The young hollow brushed one of the carvings as went by, noting that there was nothing special to them rather than their decorative purpose. Continuing further into the narrow passage, he noticed a few torches along the wall that glowed with an eerie blue flame, and more carving of the strange chimera-like hollow that he had been seeing up to this point. Then, the passage began to become more twisted, and Naruto was seriously wondering how far it extended. As he neared the end, the torches disappeared for a while, until they reappeared when he reached the end, and emerged in a large chamber, almost the size of his throne room. How can someplace so big be kept a secret down here, he asked himself, noting that some of the items in the chamber seemed to be untampered with for what looked like years. Speaking of items, there really weren't too many in the chamber, though. There were many torches, similar to the ones outside, that lines the walls to create a circular pattern. Again, there were more pictures, but this time they were not of the chimera. In addition, they were similar to mosaics or frescoes, being much more elaborate than the primitive cave drawings he had seen up to this point. The mosaics showed a bunch of angular, almost cubist shapes, but the one at the forefront seemed to be this humanoid figure, with a hole in its chest of all things. Other angular figures, more animal-like in nature, were circled around the figure in what seemed to worship. To add to the religious imagery, the prominent humanoid figure seemed to have a holy light surrounding it. Near the figure's feet was a large key, though its purpose didn't seem to be that clear. Turning his eyes away from the mosaics, Naruto looked around towards the center of the chamber. What went through his mind was that this place was some kind of shrine. At the very center of the room lay a large stone pedestal, with something resting on it, though he couldn't tell what it was at this distance. All around the pedestal lay several monuments, making the entire shrine almost look like a Stonehenge-type monument. Whatever the case, this entire area seemed to have been left here by ancient hollows. The Fox Hollow walked up the few steps leading up to the pedestal, hoping to get a glimpse at what was the deal with all these things. As he approached the pedestal, he vaguely noted two more torches that seemed to flank the centerpiece, and he finally saw what was revered so much by this shrine. It was a book. Actually, it would more accurately be called a tome. It was slid into this little notch into the stone, which was surrounded by gem-encrusted rock. The gold-striped cover didn't have any sort of title or indication of the contents inside, but Naruto felt strangely drawn to the book. He grabbed the book from off its pedestal, his paranoid mind thinking that there may be a trap waiting for him. However, the said trap never sprang, and when Naruto successfully removed the book, a much smaller notebook fell from inside the cover. He placed the larger book on his back as he picked up the smaller notebook with his front left paw, noticing that the title was Notas de Cherubic. And, with both books in hand, the Fox Hollow slowly made his way back into his throne room. When he got back, he shooed away any of his vassals or generals that were remaining in the room. He wanted to be alone, so he could read this. He knew he shouldn't be reading this, with war on the horizon, but still, he had the feeling that the answers to all his problems lied within this piece of text. With that in mind, Naruto opened the tome without hesitation. As he read through the entire book, his eyes became wider, and his pose became more slack. There came a knock to his door several times, but Naruto just ignored it in favor of the book. Many hours later, when Naruto had finally finished the book, his pose had gone completely slack, and he dropped the book and let it crash to the ground below. He laid down on his throne in a lopsided position, his breathing a little rapid. Oh, fuck. I just read about something really fucking amazing, didn't I? He gasped out, thoroughly enraptured by the contents of that book. The sheer things that were written down in that tome were simply mind-blowing to him. He didn't think he could show this to anyone, not even Ulquiorra, until they were ready. Right now, the secrets of that book would remain with him and only him. Trying to recover, he turned to the other, much smaller notebook, the one that Cherubic had wrote and slipped into the book. The thought had been bugging Naruto for quite some time. The first book clearly wasn't written by Cherubic, but since he had slipped his own writings inside, he definitely knew about, and had most likely read it as well. Was that Ox Vasto Lorde trying to guard it or something? He opened the notebook, his thoughts lingering on what Cherubic knew. As he read through the much shorter notebook, he didn't become slack with shock like with the tome. Rather, his mouth smiled with unrestrained glee. This notebook holds some very interesting information indeed. He drawled, looking around his throne room for a moment. In fact, Cherubic's notes may just help me to defeat his brother. And that was how Naruto had planned out what to do. Cherubic's information held many secrets to his brother's abilities, strengths, and weaknesses. The now deceased Ox Hollow had mentioned some sort of falling out between the two in his notes, and he needed to be prepared in case his older brother one day came looking for revenge. What was Cherubic's preparation came as a gold mine for Naruto. The notes documented Drindo's abilities in perfect detail, and also mentioned how Drindo may like to use animal hollow slaves, with special collars to keep them in line. To top it all off, it even explained how to disable the collars. This information would definitely be useful in dealing with the future onslaught. He had the perfect plan to deal with them, and now he just needed to be lucky enough for it to work in his favor. To tell the truth, they had been expecting the attack for several days now, and his trap was already prepared, just waiting to be sprung. All they needed now was the trigger, when one of the hollows he placed on lookout reported back to him. Naruto sighed. This kingdom business was coming along at least somewhat well. Well, his throne room could really be called more of an encampment than a palace, and he was really a king in name only at this point. At least he had gotten his new subjects settled in No. This place was big enough to be a capital city of some kind, but right now the lesser hollows were split into many different settlements throughout the cave complex. He had left it to Ulquiorra, who had skillfully divided up the hollows based on their abilities, and how likely they were to fight each other. He had found the old settlements of hollows who had lived here during Terobic's time, and the hollows had taken up residence in the many different hive-like structures that were scattered throughout the labyrinth. In addition, once Naruto relayed the plan to Ulquiorra, the Bat Hollow also took the liberty of making preparations for the other hollows. They were scattered all throughout the cave complex, so if Drindo wanted to fight them on their home turf, then it would be impossible for them to avoid the encampments. Naruto didn't know where he would be without Ulquiorra. The Bat Hollow had basically taken care of all domestic issues, and the sorting of the population was just one of the things he had resolved. Speaking of Ulquiorra, the wooden door to his chamber creaked open, and inside came the reliable Bat Hollow. Naruto grinned lightly at his right-hand man, knowing deep inside that something was about to go down. The Bat Hollow gave a slight bow, something that was respectful but not too overt and fancy. When he was done, he walked dutifully into Naruto's chamber, and locked eyes with the Fox Hollow himself. Naruto, one of the lookouts at the top of the plateau, spotted Drindo and his army off the coast. They will arrive here and begin their attack within an estimated 12 hours. Their army is large, larger than we expected, and it seems that they brought the slaves along in order to attack with them. However, I have sent word to all the hollows in all the settlements, and told them to prepare to attack them," he said, not wasting any time or breath on useless statements. Naruto hopped to his feet, looking somewhat anxious and pleased. "That's good. Are Grimmjow and Neutra keeping the other hollows in line at the two largest settlements, and making sure they do their jobs?" he asked. Ulquiorra faltered slightly at that question. Unfortunately, some of the hollows have been unresponsive or rebellious to their jobs. So far, the two of them have had to put down a combined total of 17 hollows who have made it clear that they're not interested in you. However, I get the feeling that they were both just looking for an excuse to kill something. In more fortunate news, the smaller settlements that Grimmjow and Neutra are unassigned to have had no known skirmishes under the various leaders you appointed," he finished. Naruto looked slightly angry at the prospect of rebellion, but he quickly shrugged it off. "Well, whatever. 17 is a fucking drop of water in an ocean, but the idea of rebellion isn't good for me. Anyway, the important thing right now is that we're prepared for Drindo's attack." The fox Ajuchas walked over to the big wooden door, creaking it open slightly with his paws. He then turned to Ulquiorra, his eyes filled with silent confidence. "It's time we head to the front lines. I have a large role in this as well." "Quit your lazing around and get to it," roared a particularly tenacious guard, who called up to the slaves when the last one had finally scaled the plateau. Harabel glared down at the guard, even though he couldn't really see her. "We'll be waiting here while you besties go and destroy this kingdom. But, remember, leave the Fox King and his bat lackey alive so I can deal with them myself. The rest of them you have full permission to kill," ordered Drindo, his loud voice carrying up the plateau clearly. These pathetic hollows weren't even going to fight their own battles, Harabel thought to herself. It seemed a similar thought was going through everyone else's head as well. Such thoughts reminded her just how poor of a military commander Drindo actually was. He had gained all his territory through the use of slaves, and fortunately for him, his opponents didn't seem to be that bright either. She couldn't remember the last time his army had actually done any fighting of their own. She turned back to her task at hand, and immediately she already noticed a problem. This entire mission wasn't going to be very straightforward, as there were no less than 10 entrances into the subterranean reaches of the plateau, and the Shark Hollow could figure out immediately that the interior of this was going to be a labyrinth. "What's the hold-up?" came the voice of one of the guards, but Harabel and the other slaves simply ignored him. She had her eyes on the many different cave entrances, trying to figure out what to do. The other slaves seemed to have their eyes on her, waiting for her guidance. Okay. She started, and everyone's attention was now fully on her. She commanded unchallenged authority in the entire group, as the strongest hollow and the leader. We're going to split up into 4 groups here, and each group will travel down a different entrance. Any hollows that have a bioluminescence will be at the forefront, as it will likely be very dark in there. There's also no doubt in my mind that the enemy will have traps set up for us as we descend. Everyone's objective is to flush out the enemies and exterminate them, while making sure not to fall for any of their traps, she ordered, and the hollows around her grunted in confirmation. After splitting into their groups, the other 3 descended first, leaving Harabel's group behind alone to enter after them. She felt somewhat uneasy about this entire ordeal. Splitting into groups. She felt that was exactly what the enemy wanted. Harabel didn't let her guard down inside the interior, as the bioluminescent hollow at the forefront lead the way through the deep cavern. She was surprised by how complex and treacherous the complex could be. There were multiple places for rock slides, and many bottomless pits that could be a real hazard for the group. Right now, they were trudging along a narrow staircase that spiraled along a tall, narrow chamber. There was a deep pit below them, and from what they could see, there were wide platforms and areas that lead to other parts of the cavern all throughout the chamber. She guessed that this could be called the main hub of the dungeon. They had already lost a slave to the bottomless, a clumsy pig-like hollow who lost his footing and fell, his fearful squealing continuing even after he went splat when he reached the bottom. Harabel's mind was taken off of the pig hollow, when she thought she saw a shadowy figure moving about in the darkness. She halted, and so did the rest along with her. Wait! I saw a shadowy figure lurking on that platform a level above us, she said, gesturing to said platform, which hung over their heads. The other hollows tensed up slightly, waiting for their leader's order. She saw it again, and this time it didn't go unnoticed by the rest of the group. They tensed up at the arrival, and one impatient Ajucha's slave worked up the nerve to fire a Siro at the shadowy figure. The red beam of light missed the target completely, hitting the stone wall directly below the platform and causing several chunks of rock to fall from the damaged area. Idiot! Harabel hissed at the attacker. Don't be so reckless with your attacks. Do you want this place to cave in on us? She finished with a roar, and the hollow who attacked had the decency to look sheepish. The shadowy figure is gone now. She sighed, looking up at the platform to see nothing there. Just a sea of darkness in a place where their light source couldn't reach. Come to think of it, the shadowy figure could still be there watching them, and just hiding out of view of their light. We probably just drew attention to ourselves with that attack, so we've lost the element of surprise, she stated, glaring lightly at the offending hollow who had blown their cover. We'll continue on to that platform where we saw the shadowy figure, and see if we can flush it out there. Just keep your guard up. They have the advantage in this darkness, and that shadowy figure might use it to get a sneak attack on one of us. Just then, they heard a distant crashing of rocks, following by what seemed to be the collapse of something, as well as some cries of pain and distress in there as well. Her eyes widened under her mask, and she speeded to the front past the bioluminescent hollow. Hurry, everyone! We need to get to higher ground, and figure out the source of that noise, she stated, as the rest of the slave hollows increased their speed to keep up with her. They managed to cover their distance in a few seconds flat with their speed, reaching the edge of the platform where they had seen the shadowy figure. Getting a better view though, they could see a tunnel near the end, which clearly led to another area in the complex. The slaves nodded to each other, but then the same shadowy figure darted out from his hiding place behind a large stone pillar situated on the platform, and ran with great speed through the tunnel opening. This caught all of the slaves off guard, some of them fumbling around in the dark, lost and confused on what they were supposed to do. Just then, they heard another round of rock slides and screaming, leading Harabel to believe that another group was hit. Damn it, we've got to hurry, she exclaimed. Follow that hollow, she ordered to the rest of the group. The bioluminescent hollow took off into the tunnel, while Haribel and the rest of the group trailed behind. The group of hollows trudged through the narrow chamber in almost a straight line, searching desperately for the being that they were chasing. As they approached the end of tunnel and were about to emerge into a different chamber, the same noises could be heard again, signifying that the third and final group had fallen for their traps. Shit, this isn't going so well. Haribel thought to herself, as she emerged out of the tunnel and into another area of the chamber. All in all, it looked somewhat similar to the area they just came from, which meant multiple staircases and a pit in the center. There came a shout from the bottom of the pit, and Haribel rushed over to the edge to get a better look. It was too dark to see anything down there, but she could hear many a cry of hollows down there, and from their pained cries, it was hollows on their side. What in the world? So the collapsing noises were definitely the staircases, and the slave hollows fell down there in the process. However, this place is too intact for anything like that, then that means. She trailed off in her thoughts for a moment, her mind trying to figure out just what happened. That there are many areas with pits like these ones, and all the pits are connected to the same bottom area. There are no walls or obstacles blocking anything at the bottom. She ran over this theory in her mind, finding it suitably logical. There came a what seemed to be a rolling noise coming from upwards, and Haribel craned her neck upwards to see what she thought would be her downfall. On a high, wide ledge greatly above her, there was a settlement of enemy hollows, the ones she was assigned to search out and destroy. However, it seemed that those hollows weren't too keen on visitors, as they had prepared no less than 20 humongous boulders that were currently perched on the end of the ledge. Boulders that they were clearly intending on rolling down at them. Oh CRA, she thought, but before she could finish, she saw that shadowy figure, now slightly more clear to them, climbing up the ledge to join with the rest of his comrades by the boulders. Oh no. He was just a decoy. We played right into their hand. How could I be so stupid, she scolded herself, but she would have no time for that, as one of the shadowy hollows on the far left rolled his boulder down the slope. It smashed into one of the staircases, killing 2 slave hollows and reducing the stairs themselves to pieces. A few hollows fell into the pit, but most of the group kept their balance on the now ruined staircase. Or at least, they would until the other hollows rolled down the 19 remaining boulders upon them. This time, the boulders obliterated the staircase almost completely, leaving nowhere to stand on. They also killed more than 20 slave hollows, and every single alive one was forced to plummet into the pit without anything to stand on. Some of the Ajuchas attempted to use Sonido to get to a safe area, but it was pointless. With their level of Sonido, there was nowhere to land on when falling at their speed. Haribel hit the ground with a heavy thud, groaning lightly at the pain. The other hollows seemed to be in a similar position. They had fallen for the trap, but there was something that perplexed Haribel. The hollows should have known that a fall like that wouldn't have killed them, so what was the point of that? She looked around, there was an exit nearby, but it was sealed off completely. That meant that the hollows up there seemed to prepare for everything. She also noticed that hollows from the other groups landed down here as well, and were beginning to mingle with each other to form one giant group yet again. One of the hollows bumped into the corpse of a hollow who didn't survive the fall, and in a moment of weakness, devoured the carcass out of sheer hunger. A similar thing happened to all the other dead hollows in the vicinity. There were torches lining the walls down here, making it much more visible than it was up there. Still, it took the group quite some time for them to notice a few figures standing on a ledge more than 50 feet above them. Haribel was the first to notice them, and her eyes widened when she saw just who it was she was looking at. An 8-foot-tall fox Ajuchas, and one that exactly matched the description in Drindo's report. This was their main target, the one they were supposed to bring back alive. Behind him there seemed to a few other hollows, a bat one, a panther one, and a mantis. Also, crumpled at his feet was an unconscious slave hollow, one of them that he had apparently taken hostage. The other hollows who had fallen seemed to realize the same thing, as within the crowd there seemed to be quite a bit of muttering going on between them. She heard a few of them mention about how this was their target. Yet again, a hollow stupidly tried to attack this target with a Zero, though it was easily avoided by all four hollows on the ledge. With their only real method of attacking them, it would be impossible to defeat them like this. The fox hollow grabbed the unconscious hollow, holding him at arm's length. He stroked the slave medallion attached to the creature's neck lightly, drawing anger from the hollows below. Harabel stood in silence as the other hollows roared and jeered at the fox hollow. What is he doing? She thought to herself, seeing the Fox King touch the slave medallion. She saw him smile gently, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was just something so off about that smile. I know, he whispered, and yet the voice resonated completely into the pit below, and filled the ears of every hollow present there. The slave hollows grew silent at that remark, and within a few seconds there came some slight murmuring from the crowd. No more rage, just a strange sense of curiosity. I know about this medallion. I know about your oppression. I know that you are all slaves to Dreamdo. Slaves, forced to work for him and fight his battles. You all yearn for the day that you will be set free from your torment, he started, his voice quiet and benevolent. Could it be? Harabel thought to herself. If this hollow knew about the torment she and all these other hollows had suffered at the hands of Dreamdo, was he implying that he could set them free? Was this her savior? After these thoughts, there came a slight dampener to Harabel's high hopes, as she remembered what type of world she lived. Still, the hollow's words sounded so gentle, so sincere, that she couldn't help but trust him in spite of herself. What she didn't realize that beyond that thickly veiled persona was nothing but an evil character who cared nothing for them. Out of all the hollow in the room, Ulquiorra was the only one to tell that his speech pattern was purely false. Do you wish to be free? To be able to do whatever you please? Or do you simply want Dreamdo to suffer for his crimes? He started, and every hollow was now enraptured by his chant. Then join me, I can help you. I can free you, he said, his false charisma beginning to shine through. He then adopted a look of faux sorrow, one that Ulquiorra thought looked incredibly out of place. I know I have done some unforgivable things in order to tell you this. I ordered my men to drop boulders on you, which even killed a few of your comrades. But, you were under orders to capture me on sight, and that was the only way I could talk to you like this, he cried, his voice becoming louder again at the last part. As you can see, we are all fellow animal hollows. His voice crept even louder. Do you want to spend the rest of your lives being forced to work for those pathetic humanoid hollows? Or do you want to live free with your brethren? You may not think that you have the power to defeat Dreamdo and his army, but united we can. United, we can fight. And united, we can win. Can you hear the war drums beating? They're telling you to rise up against your oppressors, and free yourselves at last. Join me, as together we outnumber Dreamdo's army, and without combined strength, we can win, he roared, the speech ringing true to many of the slaves. There came cheers from the crowd, those who were inspired by Naruto's words, and raring to exact their revenge on Dreamdo. However, not all were convinced by Naruto's speech, as several of them continued to hiss and boo at Naruto's words, while reminding their fellows that he had killed many a comrade. A few of them even attempted to fire more Siros. Naruto wasn't fazed. If some of you still remain unconvinced of my truthful words, then perhaps this will convince you. I have discovered a secret recently, one that I learned from Dreamdo's brother Terobik, and something I think you will find quite astonishing. He said. He once again turned his attention back to the unconscious hollow that he was holding, placing his hand against the chain attached to its neck. Terobik's notebook says the following, he started, preparing to do something to the hollow's medallion. Apply 76 newtons of force directly and precisely on the 4 joints of the medallion. This is the key to removing the medallion without harming the wearer. It can be performed by anyone who is proficient in Ryatsu control. A single finger push in the right area should be sufficient enough to remove the device, he said casually, pressing his finger against each of the 4 corners of the medallion. The hollows below watch with apt awe at Naruto's performance. Even the ones who were untrusting of Naruto's proposition were silent. Then suddenly, there came a slight pop and a click, and a clang as the medallion that had caused them so much grief clattered to the flood, now useless. The slaves were stunned. Flat out floored by what just happened. Their medallion, the source of their problems in life, was gone just like that. At the hands of the one they were supposed to have captured. After that, the other three hollows flanking Naruto seemed to come to the forefront, as if they were going to assist Naruto in the removing of all the medallions. Now, simply swear allegiance to me, and I will remove each and every one of your medallions, allowing you to live free under my reign. We will also bring the attack to Drindo, and destroy his army of humanoid hollows, he exclaimed, only to be met with a much louder chorus of cheers. The few who remained skeptical of Naruto's intentions were quickly turned, when they witnessed that most of the slaves were jumping at the opportunity to get their collars off. Naruto was shining underneath the full approval of the slave hollows, a bastion of morality underneath these slaves who have had all hope torn from them. No matter how false his proclamations were, he continued to shine through. For a split second, an insane grin that showed his true nature surfaced, but it was gone as soon as it came, replaced with the confident, kind smile that the slave hollows had taken a liking to. And, while underneath the spotlight, after what felt like was top of the world, Naruto whispered one thing that would go unheard by anyone in the entire chamber. Perfect. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this what if and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. See you in the next video. Peace.